I'm very humbled by you guys showing up and spending your time to come here to support me. My mom is here, and 25 years ago, my mom dropped me off at a homeless shelter, and I was told at that shelter that I could never recover and I could never get better. Well, yesterday was 25 years without picking up a drink or a drug, and I have a great life today, okay? And this started out, I was just talking with Cody and Erica, and we were talking a little bit about, you know, I do this for patients to try to help them understand the 12-step process and how to get better. And in our conversation, we were going to fix the world, and I said, you know, I wish I could get this message out to more people and help people, and they said, and Cody said, well, you know, we can record it, and I said, oh, that's great, that sounds good. That was a few months ago. And the closer it got, the more nervous I got about this whole thing. And yeah, I can't tell you how grateful I am and how humbled I am that you guys would show up in my life, because there's so many people here that mean so much to me. I have family members in the room that have never heard me speak about recovery. My mom has never heard me speak about recovery. My wife has never heard me really speak about recovery other than what I talk at home. She's never seen me do a lecture or anything like that. I'm so humbled from the people that I work with that showed up here, took their time off to come here. I have so much to be grateful for. I'm going to try to take you on a journey. I don't want to spend a lot of time in the wreckage and the mess, because, you know, that's really not the important thing here. What's really important here is that I put out a message of hope, and I try to connect the dots for some people who might feel hopeless and might not feel like they can pull themselves out from where they are and start a new life. Welcome. In 1983, I was already going down a dead-end street. I was, you know, I thought I was having a time of my life, but I really wasn't having a time of my life. I had been divorced. I was spending a lot of time in bars, started doing a lot of cocaine, and had been a couple years since I'd even contacted my son. I had an 8-year-old little boy, and for some reason, I know the reason now is my higher power, but for some reason I reached out on a Friday and I called him, and my little boy said, you know, I said, I'm sorry I didn't call you, Jason. I love you. And he said, I knew you'd call me one day, Daddy. I knew you loved me. And then that Sunday, my son was killed in an ATC accident, and he was 8 years old. And when that happened, I became so angry, and I didn't care about anything, and my lifestyle was already going in the wrong direction, but at that point, I didn't care. I just became a lunatic. Now, that happened in 1983. My clean date is 1993. So there was a 10-year period there of complete wreckage in my life. And I went to several treatment centers and stuff like that. They would talk about, do this 12-step work, and you'll get better. I would do good in treatment. When I left treatment, I would end up going back to the same life that I left before. I ended up at this shelter when she dropped me off, and I was so hopeless and I was so broken that I made my mind up that either I was going to die or I was going to do something different. I was 43 years old. I didn't have a trade. I hadn't worked in years. All my faith was shattered. I had no faith. I didn't believe in anything. I didn't believe there could be any God or any higher power that was going to come down and touch me and make my life better, okay? And when I got to this place, I had been in treatment with this gentleman before. His name was Willie. And he did the lecture that I'm going to try to do tonight for you guys to help you understand how to connect the dots to bring your life back from ruins. And when he did this lecture, I listened to it, and after the lecture, I went up to him and I said, man, how did you get like this? I mean, you know, this is awesome. I want what you have. And he said, you can get what I have if you do what I do. But he said, you have to be willing to do a couple of things. And I said, what's that? He said, well, the one thing you have to have is you have to have a higher power. And I said, well, I have to find another way because I don't believe in no higher power. My life is a wreck. My little boy was taken from me. There's nothing going to come down out of the sky and touch me and change my life and make me better. So I said, I got to find some other solution. That won't work. He said, no, it's not like that. He said, if I can prove to you that there's a higher power, if I can prove it to you, and you can, something that you can actually see and touch and feel, if I can do that for you, will you give this a chance? And I said, yeah, but I don't believe in none of this woo-woo stuff that's going to come out of the sky and touch me and make my life better. It's got to be something that I can, that I can touch and feel. And he said, well, let me ask you this. A couple of months ago when you were out and you were using, if I came to you and I said, I have some money, will you cop for me? Will you get me something? What would you tell me? And I said, I'd go and cop and I'd get some for me too. And he said, well, how about right now? I'll give you the money, you go and cop for me. And he says, I'll give up this recovery thing and we'll get high. And I thought about it and I said, no. I just heard you give this speech and I just heard, who you are and what you're doing. And I wouldn't want to see you throw that away. And he said, that's the power that I'm talking about. He said, that power is called the spirit of recovery. And that happens when you put a bunch of people together and they're concentrating on the same thing and they're wanting to get better. And he said, that's the only power you need to use to make this work. And he said, can you try that? I said, well, sounds kind of crazy, but I was desperate and I said, I'll try anything if it'll help me get better. So from that point on, I was told that I needed to use GOD. For me in the beginning was a group of drunks. And he said, that group of drunks will help you go through this process and it'll help you get clean and sober and it'll help you change your life. And I said, well, I don't see how that's going to happen. He said, well, what you need is somebody to show you how to live again, to show you how to be happy and to live life without the use of drinking and drugging. And he said, is that what you want? I said, that's what I want. So I really didn't know what I needed to change. I'd been to all kinds of treatment centers. I'd been, and I wanted to get better. I meant in my heart I wanted to get better. And people would say, well, what's going to change? And I'd say, well, I'm not going to use anymore. Or I'm going to get a job. If I just didn't use and I had a job, I'd be all better. Everything would be great. And that was as far as I knew to take it because I didn't know what I needed to change. So he said, well, it's the same thing as if your car breaks down. You got to troubleshoot your car and you got to figure out what's wrong with it. And he said, once you figure out what's wrong with it, there's got to be a starting place to get better. And he said, that's where this process starts at. And then he said, and I said, well, what is that? And then he pointed to these 12 steps. And I know you guys, some of you guys as old as I am, I know you can't read it, but that's going to be my prop. So he said, you go through these 12 steps and you start at the first one. And I said, well, I've been looking at that stuff for years. I said, that's ridiculous. I said, I read the first step. It says, we admitted we were powerless over our addiction. Our lives become manageable. I said, I knew I had a problem 25, 30 years ago. Why is that going to help me? He said, you're not looking at the principles behind the steps. And I said, what is that? He said, this whole process is a spiritual process and is guided by spiritual principles. And he said, the lifestyle that I was living had pushed these principles out of my life. He said, when you were a little guy, you probably had these principles. You probably knew right from wrong. You probably knew not to lie, not to steal, not to, to share with other people, to be kind to other people. He said, these are just the little basic things that they teach you in kindergarten. But he said, as soon as you started picking up alcohol and drugs, the first thing you started doing was you started lying. And he said, you've pushed that principle of honesty so far out of your life that it doesn't exist anymore. And I said, what do you mean? I'm an honest guy. I don't lie. I tell you when I use. And he said, well, here's what it says in the 12th one of these. It says, practice these principles in all our affairs. So he said, what we're going to do is that's going to be the starting point. That's going to be like checking the battery in your car. And what we're going to do is we're going to work that honesty in all the affairs of your life. And we're not going to use, and we're going to get honest with ourselves. He said, now let's get honest with, we admitted we were powerless over our addiction. He says, if you know that something is going to kill you, or the very best that you can hope for, that it's going to make you miserable, and it's going to hurt everybody around you that you care about or that cares about you, and you continue to put that substance in your body, that's not sane thinking. That's insane. And he said, and I said, I just used drugs. I wasn't insane. He said, for you to use drugs, you're insane. And he said, that's what they talk about in the second step. It says, came to believe a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. That implies that I'm insane. And he said, so you got to use this honesty, and you can't use, and you have to be honest with yourself that you can't put this substance in your body. Now he says, there's another place in this thing that nobody talks about. Now I'm used to teaching this where it has a dash in between, but this has a comma. So tonight we're going to use comma, okay? He said, nobody talks about that comma right there. And he said, that comma is the place where you justify picking up the first drink or drug. And he said, if you work this process and you go through this whole process and you don't pick up a drink or a drug again, you don't have to work through all of that yuck in your life anymore. Because as soon as you pick up the first drink or drug, it's going to start it all over again. And I knew it would because I tried to stop so many times, okay? So I have to admit that I can't use these substances. I have to admit that I can't justify using no matter what. He said the only way this works is if for you to make staying clean and sober the biggest priority in your life. It has to be more important than your family, your job, your money, anything. Recovery has to come first. Because if you justify picking up a drink or a drug, everything else goes. And I bought into that. He said, think of this dash, or this comma, think of that as rat poison. And if you had a problem and you wanted to fix your problem, would you go and eat a cube of rat poison? Would that make you better? Or would it kill you? And I said, it would kill me. I don't know how that happened, but I've been able to register in my brain. And anytime I think about using any substance, I think of rat poison. If I'm in a restaurant and I see a glass of wine go by and it starts to look good, I immediately think rat poison. Because that's what it is to me. It's a poison. I'm allergic to it. Okay? So it's the same thing as eating decon. And then it says that our lives have become unmanageable. Well, if I pick up a drink or a drug, the best I can hope for is for my life to become unmanageable and really possibly could be killed. And then we get to step 2, and it says, we came to believe a power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity. He said that was hope. He said that's the principle behind that step is hope. And I looked and I said, well, I don't see hope written in there. How does that equal hope? And he said it equals hope because by staying clean and sober, doing the right thing, practicing on being a better person and being honest, and not using, you can look in the mirror and you can look around you at the group of drunks that you're getting clean and sober with, and you can see that you're getting better. You might not be where you want to be yet, but you can certainly see where you've improved and you're getting a little bit better. And that gave me hope. I could see that. And then he said, step 3, we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. And he said that was faith. And here we are with this faith thing again. And my faith when I started this process was shattered. Okay? I didn't have any faith left. I didn't believe in anything else. Well, when I got to this, it says, we made a decision to turn our will and lives over to the care of God as we understood him. Well, my sponsor says, what are you doing? I says, I'm trying to get this connection. What is this? You know, it says God of our understanding. I don't feel this connection. And he said, you idiot. You haven't used. Your life is getting better. God's already working in your life, man. You don't have to paint God's picture. God is God. He don't need you to paint his picture or say who he is or what he looks like. You need him in your life to help you continue doing what you're doing. So he said, The faith, what you got to do in step 3, it ain't about drawing a picture of God. It's about making a decision. It's the easiest step, he said. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, are you going to go back to your old way of living? Or are you going to follow the rest of this program and continue with your new way of life? And being in treatment, when you get out of treatment, that's what the decision is. Am I going to go back to my old way of living, or am I going to continue on with the recovery program and keep going? So I said I'd continue on. Then when we get to step 4, he said, we made a fearless and searching moral inventory of ourselves. And he said that was courage. And I said, how is that courage? I don't see courage written on there. This guy's nuts. So then I processed it, and it came to me that the reason it took courage is because by the time I got to step 4, I didn't want to do that writing anymore. I didn't want to answer those questions anymore. It seems like the whole thing was just digging up your wreckage, because you get this step work and you answer these questions, and it's all about going back over this yuck that I don't want in my life anymore. I'm not living like that anymore. By the time I got down here, I'm taking showers. I'm smelling a little better. I ain't lying to nobody. I'm pretty much showing up. I have, I'm starting to, if I made a promise to you, I'm starting to keep a promise. See, when I started this process, if I made a promise, it didn't matter. Because if I changed my mind, I didn't care what you thought about it, okay? I was that guy that would tell my little boy I was going to pick him up on a Sunday to go out for the day, and I'd get too high the night before, so I'd just blow him off. I'd change my mind. Or if you said to me, I need help this Saturday, I really need you to be there because I got to move and I don't have any other way to do it. I need to depend on you to be there. Well, I'd promise you anything, especially if you were buying. But when it come time to go, I'd just blow you off. That's the kind of guy I was. Well, by the time I got to this step 4, I wasn't really that guy anymore, because I was working this honesty in my life. I wasn't using anymore. I was trying to live a better life. So I was tired of digging all this stuff up. And he said, listen, you want to get better? And I said, yeah. He said, stop whining, pick up the pen, and answer the questions. So I did. About halfway through that process, I started feeling a little bit better, okay? And then when I finished that, I got to this step 5. It says, we admitted to God, to ourselves, and another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Now, when I got ready to do, and I did that work, and then you're supposed to sit down, in step 4, you do your work, and then step 5, you go over your work with your sponsor. Well, when I sat down with my sponsor to do the work, my sponsor says, do you realize that the way you've been living and the way your life has been going, that you're a guy now who has integrity? And I said, integrity, me? He said, yeah, that's right. The way you've been living, you're a guy that has integrity. And that felt so good, because that wasn't who I had started. When I started this, I was a mess. I couldn't be trusted for nothing. Couldn't be depended on for nothing. And I wasn't that guy anymore by the time I reached that point in my recovery. And that felt really good. So now I got honesty, hope, faith, courage, and integrity working in my life. Those were things that had been pushed out of my life through the way I was living and through the lifestyle that I was living. And then we got to step 6. We're entirely ready to have God remove these defects of character. Now, I had warnings about step 4, that, everybody struggled with step 4 and all this stuff. But nobody really warned me about step 6. Step 6 is where you really got to start doing the work. Because all of this stuff was about, even though I was changing, the principles that you're working in this process, they help you change and you don't even realize you're changing. But when I got to step 6, it was like on me now. It says I got to remove all these defects of character. I got to get rid of them. I got to eliminate them. Well, first of all, I had to find out what a character defect was. So I started writing these things down, and my sponsor said, no, you're just not getting it. I said, what do you mean? He said, a character defect is anything that makes you less than lovable. I said, darn, I got a lot of work to do, okay? So we sat down on his list, and he gave me a little assignment. He actually had me take did anybody, the movie Seven, where they have the 7 different things? He had me take those things and look at my life, and I had to write down a list of things that I thought I needed to improve on. To my surprise, there was a few things I needed a little improvement on, okay? So he had me write down by poker chips, and on one side I had to write down the character defects that I came up with, and I had to write the opposite of that on the other side. And I had to put them in this little box. He called it a God box. And then every day when I woke up, I had to pull out a chip. And whatever chip I pulled out is what I had to work on for the day. Well, if you pull out patience, buddy, you're going to catch every red light and sit in every food line there is. And if you pulled out anger, look out for the road rage, because it's coming. So that was quite the thing there. And I went through a lot of that stuff. And then he said in step 7, oh, and by the way, this is willingness, is a principle behind that step. Now, I was told that willingness is like the engine that runs this whole thing. It's kind of like in your car. The more horsepower you have, the more power you have. Well, in this process, the more willingness you have, the more you get out of the process, okay? So if you're not willing, you're not going to get anything out of it. But if you're willing, you will. And I truly was willing by this point, because to my amazement, I could see improvement, and I was starting to feel a little bit happy about myself. Step 7, humbly ask him to remove our shortcomings. And he said, and I didn't know, what's a shortcoming? He said, what's the difference in a shortcoming and a character defect? I said, I don't know. And he said, there isn't any difference. He said, a shortcoming is a character defect that you want to be rid of, and you've tried your best to get rid of it, but it pops up, such as patience or anger, or for me, lying. Because see, I didn't know it. I thought I was this honest guy, but I was like a pathological liar and a manipulator, and I could manipulate myself to believe that my lies were right. In fact, if you showed me a dictionary with a meaning in it, I would tell you it was a misprint, okay? So in 7, he says, here's what you got to do. When you catch yourself in a shortcoming, you got to rat yourself out, and you got to change the behavior. So we sat with him. I'll never forget it. I sat with him, went through this. I got to rat myself out if it comes up. At that time, I was going to school for counseling, and I was in this classroom, and the instructor says to the classroom, how many people in here did methadone? And the whole class raised their hands a lot, because there was a lot of people in there in recovery at that time. And I raised my hand. Never did methadone in my life, okay? And I just did this, this step work. And I'm thinking, this damn guy, I got to do what he told me to do, because I really wanted, I was getting progress, and I was scared to death, because I didn't want to go back through what I'd been through in my life, okay? So I wait till the break, and I shuffle up to this instructor, and I said, ma'am, I got to tell you something. She said, what's that? I said, you ask everybody if they did methadone. And I raised my hand, and I need to tell you that wasn't true. She probably thought, what is wrong with this guy? I felt so humiliated. I was so mad at my sponsor, and I went back to him. I said, I hope you're happy. You made an idiot out of me. He said, no, you needed to be humiliated to get some humility, because humility is the principle behind step 7. And he said, those first 7 steps are about self. They're about the individual. Honesty, hope, faith, courage, integrity, willingness, and humility. He said, you need those principles instilled back in your life, and you need to be working that in your life before you can work on 8 and 9. And 8 and 9 is about people other than yourself. It's about relationships, okay? Step 8, we made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. When I started this process, when I looked at this like a checklist, I said, not that one. I can do everything else, not that one. That one scared the bejeebies out of me. Well, to my amazement, by the time I did this work and I got to step 8, and I made my list, most of that stuff was taken care of when I got to 9. Step 8 says, we made a list of all persons we harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. And then in step 9, which this is brotherly love, step 9 I was taught was perseverance. We made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. So my sponsor says that you can't make yourself get better by hurting somebody else. Which means, like, I can't say I had an affair with my neighbor's wife, and now I'm, all good and clean and honest and everything. I can't run across the street to my neighbor and his wife and tell him I wasn't going to have an affair with her anymore, because that would harm somebody else, including myself. So what I would have to do in place of that is not have an affair with anybody's wife other than my own. Okay? I had to change the behavior. And she's pointing at me. Okay? So this direct amends thing, tonight I have family members here who have never heard me speak before about recovery. And my mom is here, has never heard me speak about recovery before. So I was always told that you make an amends when the amends shows up. And boy, did it show up tonight. So, 25 years ago when I started this, the only person that would have showed up at this room is my mom. And I'm so overwhelmed with the people that showed up for me here tonight. So thank you so much for that. Okay? So we made direct amends to such people. What I had to do in this is I had to understand that what's an amends? Because I really didn't know what amends was. I knew how to say I was sorry, and I knew how to say I wasn't going to do it anymore, and it wasn't going to happen again. But how many times do you say the same things to the same people over and over again and expect them to believe you? And my sponsor said, it ain't about nobody believing you. It's about changing the behavior. And it's not an amends unless you change the behaviors. And so when I got ready to make this amends, I can tell you my mom probably doesn't even remember it. But I remember I had a year clean. And that means I was about 44 years old. My mom's a little bit older than I was. She came there to see me pick up that medallion, and afterwards we went to a movies. And when we went to the movies, I bought a box of popcorn. And I handed her the popcorn. And she started crying. She probably don't even remember it, but that's all she ever wanted, was to see me do something for somebody else other than myself. And the lesson for this in step 8 is, you know what? The people that you have to make amends to, they really don't want things from you. They want you to be happy and to be sober and clean and live a good life. And that's the amends that I've been able to bring, not only to myself, but to the people who I love and care about and love and care about me. So that was step 9. It wasn't important that people didn't believe me, because it didn't matter. I was taught that once you change the behavior, it's no longer who you are. So yes, it's right, you need to apologize, you need to explain to people that you're sorry, that you don't want it to happen anymore. But once you change the behavior, it's like driving in your car. You got a stop sign behind your car. As you drive down the street, the stop sign disappears. It goes away. Well, that's what happens with that bad behavior, because it's not there anymore. So it's no longer who I am. And I can't go back in time and undo the things that I did. I can't go, a lot of the amends I had to make in step 9 were for people that weren't here anymore. I owed my little boy an amends, because the last 2 years of his life, part of my manipulation and lying was telling myself that he didn't need me in his life, that he was better off without me, and I wasn't there for him. Or about those times when he would be over for visitation and I'd be in the room getting high, and he'd knock on the door wanting to play with me, and I would think in my heart, oh, I wish this kid would just leave me alone. Okay? That's who I was. I have to own it in order to get better from it. So the reason I bring him up a lot in my lectures is because this is my amends to him. Because I want to live my life today the way that I would want him to live his life. And that way, that's the only thing I can do to make amends for who I was. I had other people in my life who meant so much to me, who I couldn't make amends to because they were gone. So what my sponsor had me do is he had me write letters. And I would write these letters, put them in an envelope. He had me put nowhere on them, put a stamp on it, and stick it in the mailbox. I don't know where nowhere is, but there's a bunch of letters in nowhere, wherever that is. And I mailed them. I don't know if it helped. All I know is I haven't had to use, and I did what he told me to do. Okay? And then step 10 is my favorite step. It says, continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. Well, step 10, the principle behind step 10 is self-discipline. And that was when I really became aware of the difference in my behavior. Because believe me, when I started this process, I had no self-discipline. And a lot of people know me in this room, you know, I got pretty good discipline today. Okay? I really work at that. But the neat thing about step 10 is it gives me an opportunity to, on a continuous basis, forever, to become a better person. Because it says, continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. Well, what I do is I inventory my behavior on a daily basis. When I fall short, and I come into work, and my boss says something to me, and I come out the side of my neck because I had a bad night, or whatever the reason is, I need to promptly admit it. I need to not only apologize for it, but I need to change the behavior. And if I'm changing the same behavior every day, I haven't changed the behavior. But if I continue to change the behaviors as I fall short or as they pop up, I get to continue to be a better person on a daily basis. And I fall short all the time, as we all do. But at least I have an opportunity to try to make it better. And in step 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. The only thing I can tell you, by the time I went through this process and I got to this step, my heart was not the same anymore. I didn't have this hard, blackened, shattered faith of a heart. I have faith today. I believe in people today. I care about other people today. I was so self-centered and so stuck on self when I started this that I didn't care about anybody. I didn't care about myself most of all, but I didn't care about anybody else either. Well, by the time I got to this part of this process, I sincerely care about other people. I don't like everybody, but I care about everybody. Okay? If that makes sense. I have a strong faith today. My faith is no longer shattered. I have a higher power in my life, okay? And who I call God. And you know what? That power still works for me 25 years later. I go to a home group. Home group is a meeting that I go to once a week, okay? I've been doing that since I got clean and sober. That's where I found my sponsor at. I was told you get a sponsor in your home group, and then when you show up once a week, you'll at least get to see your sponsor face to face. Okay? And I've been doing that for the whole time, and it works. Step 12, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message to addicts and practice these principles in all our affairs. Well, I've been working on practicing these principles in all our affairs. That's how I got these principles instilled back in my life. And I do try to live a principled life, even though I fall short a lot. Okay? Having had a spiritual awakening. It says having had. It promised me I was going to have a spiritual awakening. I can honestly say that I did. But the spiritual awakening is these principles: honesty, hope, faith, courage, integrity, willingness, humility, brotherly love, perseverance, self-discipline, awareness of higher power, and service. By instilling those into my life, those are spiritual principles, so it awakened my spirit. And that's the spiritual awakening that they talk about that we get in step 12. Carry this message to addicts and practice this in all our affairs. Well, I dedicated my life when I started this process to try to help other people. I can't keep other people clean. I can only try to lead by example. My friend Patrick, who I just lost recently, I wanted him sitting in that front row with me today, but I know he's in my heart, okay? At least I had 3.5 years with this guy. And you know what? It was 3.5 of the best years I feel that he ever had, and I know it was 3.5 of the best years that I had. And I know most of the people in this room know who I'm talking about, and I know Patrick is in your hearts and stuff. This has been really hard for me because it was hard to find joy, okay, in the middle of all this. But I know my friend would want me to be here, and he would be wanting this to be joyful, and he would be wanting me to do good at this because that's who he was. So I have a heavy heart because of that. That's really just about all there is to my lecture as far as the process, other than to tell you some of the things that I did during this journey. Is I went back to school. I hadn't had a job in many, many, many years. I had no trade. I had no way of making a living. I had no education. I had no place to live. I had none of that. I was very lonely. I didn't have love in my life. Well, I've had some amazing gifts happen in my life. I went back to school. Started in Miami-Dade Junior College at that time it was called. And I started back on my education. It took me 9.5 years. I did finish my master's degree and I did get licensed. At about 7 years clean, God dropped my wife back into my life, Joanne, and my picker wasn't real good. You know? I remember my dad used to say, "My dear son, I could do better with a blindfold." But anyway, God dropped my wife back into my life, and that was that. You know, I am so blessed to have her, and she puts up with all my nonsense, believe it or not. But I'm so proud that she's here. You know, my mom is here. The only person left in my life that wasn't running for cover, okay, at the end was my mom. And, you know, I have a really good relationship with her today. I call her every single day. We talk all the time. And I love my mom to death. And I love my wife to death. I don't know what else to say other than I'm truly, truly humbled that you guys came here and spent your time with me. And I hope that this is going to go on a tape. And I hope that it gets to the right hands to help somebody that's suffering and they're able to get as good a life as I did. Thank you.